Welcome to the 700 Club. Well, there's just horrible destruction after a weekend torrent of 27 tornadoes ripped through 6 states. Hardest hit was Kentucky, where it's not possible to search for victims door to door in some areas because there are no doors.
Duck and cover. Those were the last words workers in a candle factory heard before it was razed to the ground. The governor said he was praying for a miracle. Well, today there's hope his prayer might be answered. Dale Hurd reports.
Workers on the night shift at Mayfield Consumer Products were in the middle of the holiday rush, cranking out candles, when the word went out, duck and cover. Before and after photos show what happened next. It was first feared as many as 70 factory workers might be dead, but as of Monday morning, that number stands at 8 dead, 8 missing.
I am praying that maybe original estimates of those we've lost were wrong. If so, it's going to be pretty wonderful.
Dozens of people in 5 states were killed by tornadoes that leveled entire communities Friday night, leaving many areas looking like war zones. At least 4 twisters hit Kentucky, including one with an extraordinarily long path of more than 200 miles, possibly the longest in U.S. history. Entire towns are devastated, with more than 1,000 homes damaged or destroyed across 10 counties. Governor Andy Beshear said going door to door in search of victims wasn't possible in the hardest hit areas because there are no doors. Before and after photos show the damage to the Amazon warehouse in Edwardsville, Illinois, where at least 6 people died after a tornado leveled half the building. Among the victims, Justice Verdon's dad, Larry Verdon.
And I said, no, my dad's coming home. I said, I need my daddy. He can't leave.
Her dad, an Amazon driver, was returning to the facility just as the tornado struck. In Mayfield Sunday morning, worshipers gathered amidst the rubble that used to house the First Christian Church.
This is a necessary gathering.
The brick building that stood for generations was knocked down in a matter of minutes.
I was born in this church. My 3 daughters were married in this church, baptized in this church. It's more than you can stand.
We have to rely on our faith.
And rely on one another.
And we will get through this. This town is small, but it's mighty.
Governor Beshear expects the statewide death toll to reach at least 50, with at least 14 dead in Illinois, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri. FEMA, the National Guard, and volunteers are pouring in to help with cleanup and rescue. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, the devastation is just unimaginable. And CBN's Operation Blessing is already on its way to help victims of the disaster in Kentucky. Our Hunger Strike Force is delivering a truckload of water and food and other disaster relief supplies to the town of Mayfield. That's going to happen today. Our U.S. disaster relief team is cooperating with Home Depot. We're creating disaster relief kits in our warehouse in Bristol, Tennessee for further distribution. Then we have a site team on its way. This is huge. This is a all-hands-on-deck situation. The people there need a lot of help. Can Operation Blessing do it all? No, but we can do our part. If you want to be a part of that, give us a call. Say, I want to contribute to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. You can write us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. Just put Disaster Relief Fund on the memo line of the check, or you can call us right now, 1-800-700-7000, or you can visit cbn.com. In other news, the COVID-19 vaccination deadlines for most active duty service members is now passed. So far, not a single religious exemption has been granted. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. The deadline for the U.S. Army is this week, December 15th. Deadlines for the other branches, the armed forces, have already passed. However, some military personnel are still waiting for decisions on their requests for religious exemptions. As CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports, a growing number say they're being robbed of their religious liberties.
Service members waiting on their religious exemption requests remain in limbo. While accustomed to following orders, those speaking with me say their faith won't allow them to comply with this one.
It goes against my bodily sovereignty as a Christian. I mean, God makes it very clear that for me, you know, this body that I'm given, this is my last bastion of freedom.
At the request of counsel, this service member asked not to be identified. He told CBN News that he received other vaccines from the military without doing much research. That wasn't the case when it came to the COVID-19 shot.
This is something that's supposed to be good for me, and yet I'm being punished if I do not take something that's good for me. When that was the case, when that happened, I began to question, why is this being forced so heavily on us?
In his exemption request, he cites fetal cell lines used in the research and development phase of the mRNA vaccines and in the production of Johnson & Johnson's shot. If his request isn't granted, he says he'll take a discharge before going against his beliefs. First Liberty Institute is representing a group of 35 Navy SEALs seeking an exemption with similar concerns. Attorney Mike Berry argues it's unconstitutional for their requests to be denied.
That's blatant discrimination. You can't treat religious beliefs less favorably than you treat medical conditions or administrative exemptions. Religious freedom in our country is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution, and that doesn't change just because you serve in the military.
The National Faith Advisory Board, a group of more than 1,700 religious leaders organized by former President Donald Trump, is urging the Secretary of Defense to grant these religious accommodations, writing, quote, "Religious freedom is enshrined in our Constitution and must always be protected." Pentagon spokesman John Kirby tells CBN News religious exemptions are rare. For example, none has been granted in either the Navy or Marines in almost a decade.
It's not about liberties. It's about a military medical requirement to keep them safe, to keep their families safe, to keep their units safe. And the Secretary continues to strongly believe that these vaccines are the best way to do it with respect to COVID.
I heard back from a Navy spokesman who told me that there is no blanket policy about denying religious exemption requests. Each is considered on a case-by-case basis. There are, however, very strict guidelines that must be met, including a history of objecting to vaccination. Anyone who does object and refuses to comply with getting vaccinated, Christian or not, will be given a general discharge. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Thank you, Caitlin. Sticking with the response to COVID, the United Kingdom is taking quick action to stop the spread of the Omicron variant. Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing a push to make a booster available to everyone 18 and over by the end of the year. That's 1 month earlier, ahead of the earlier target, rather. Long lines formed at vaccination centers across Britain early Monday morning. UK health authorities said Omicron cases are doubling every 2 to 3 days. Johnson & Johnson is warning of a, quote, tidal wave of the variant, saying the 2 doses of the vaccine aren't enough to prevent it. Well, turning to the Middle East, where for the first time an Israeli prime minister is paying an official visit to the United Arab Emirates. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the visit highlights how the Middle East has changed since the historic Abraham Accords.
Less than 2 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for most for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed to greet Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in Abu Dhabi. Before he left for the UAE, Bennett explained the purpose of his visit.
We're going to be discussing ways to further our cooperation in a number of fields, especially strengthening our economic and commercial ties. In just 1 year since normalizing our relationship, we've already seen the extraordinary potential of the Israel-UAE partnership, and this is just the beginning.
The importance of the meeting is the meeting itself. The fact that they can have a photo op, shake hands, talk about the peace, and for the whole world and the region to see that.
Bennett's visit follows a blitz of Israeli diplomacy in light of the nuclear talks in Vienna to stop Iran's nuclear program. Last month, for the first time, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz paid an official visit to one of the Arab nations in the Abraham Accords and signed a military memorandum of understanding with Morocco. Last week, Gantz met with U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin about the Iranian threat.
The nuclear program is a means to Iran's hegemonic goals. imposing its radical ideology and threatening Israel's existence.
I'm deeply concerned about the Iranian government's nuclear actions in recent months, both its continued provocations and its lack of constructive diplomatic engagement. The president has made clear that if diplomacy fails, we are prepared to turn to other options.
What those options are remains to be seen, but Israel has made clear its military option is on the table to stop Iran's nuclear program.
Bennett's visit to the UAE underscores how far the Abraham Accords have progressed and how both Israel and its Sunni Arab neighbors see Iran as an existential threat. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Gordon, it's like we're watching a reshaping of the Middle East.
It is. It's a reshaping and a realigning where Israel was once the enemy, and now the nuclear ambitions of Iran and their provocations. I mean, the long list from drone strikes against the refineries in Saudi Arabia to Yemen being a proxy war, Hezbollah being a proxy war, all their incursions into Iraq, their support of Syria. They want to create a pathway all the way to Israel. And it's a smart move on the part of the other Arab nations to say we need to form a coalition, and Israel can actually be an ally in that. It's wonderful news. There's a curious verse in the book of Ezekiel about Israel being at peace with all its neighbors. A lot of people say, well, what about peace, and there is no peace. But there is that verse, and it's a sign when Israel gets to be at peace with all her neighbors. We can look forward to that, but at the same time, after that, there's a bit of trouble.